Alrighty, today's video is going to be on Corvid-19. For those of you who don't know what a corvid is, it's one of these birds that can fly, like a raven and a magpie. What is Corvid? We're talking about you know what I'm talking about, okay? So I made some videos on the subject before, but they got censored. So I'm going to try again because it's a few years later, and we're talking about Corvid, which is a raven, right? We're not talking about a global pandemic here. Okay, so let's look at the data, all right? I want to look at several points in data here. And I think it's pretty safe to say this was a catastrophe in terms of government actions and in terms of science, okay? So, there's the right-wing narrative and there's the left-wing narrative. I'm going to try to be as objective as I can and just give you the data itself, okay? And you can decide. So, governments based their actions and models primarily off of Imperial College. You can punch that into your AI right now and check if that's true. That's the reality. So, let's see, how did Imperial College do? On average, their overestimation to underestimation ratio was 3.5 to 1. So for every case where they underestimated how many deaths there'd be 3.5 times more cases where they overestimated. Now the big thing too is also the magnitude. Okay, so the magnitude is not symmetrical. When they underestimated deaths, they'd be off by a factor of around 0.5, but in cases of overestimation, it would typically be off by 2 to 20 times. Okay, so overall, their estimates did not match reality at all. And Sweden is one of the most important things to look at, because in Sweden, they didn't do any of these lockdowns. And so we can see very clearly, we have a very clear test here to see how accurate the Imperial College model is. And in the Sweden case, we have a death estimate of 90,000. The real observed death was 13,000. In their second case, they estimated 42,000, and the real death was 13,000. So, yeah, it's absolutely accurate to say that Corvid was a case of extreme exaggeration. So, and it's interesting too, because even after they got these predictions wrong, we can look at later estimates. So let's take a look at Omicron. That was one of the last strains of Corvid. Imperial College estimated 3,000 to 5,000 deaths, and in reality it was 300. In the second wave, they estimated 4,000 deaths, and it was 1,300 deaths. So, I don't really blame them so much for getting their initial estimates wrong. I think that, they were intentionally overestimating it, because Bill Gates is a huge donor to Imperial College. That's a well-documented fact, right? And he made a lot of money off of vaccine profits, right? So, okay, well, that's not proof. I mean, that's just speculation. But it is a fact that their estimates were consistently wrong, consistently extreme exaggeration, and even after they realized their estimates were wrong, they continued to put out incorrect, extremely exaggerated estimates, okay? So that's, I would call that a spectacular fail of science, okay? Now, the next thing they spectacularly failed at was this issue of masks. I remember when Corvid-19 came out, I was like, okay, nobody wear masks. And I was quoting science-based medicine. Okay, they were saying, don't wear masks. The masks aren't effective. Right? And then like a couple weeks later, they flipped and they all started saying, everyone has to wear masks. And I was so pissed off by that because I was like, this is such a basic thing. You can just spray, like take a little spray gun and spray it through the mask and see if it blocks these Corvid droplets, right? It's something like a grade 3 science experiment could prove or disprove, right? It's not complicated science, and they completely got that either wrong intentionally or on purpose. So, we can't trust science as reliable if they're getting these really, really basic things wrong, okay? Now, let's look at some lockdown data. There's some data suggesting that lockdowns were helpful, and there's some data suggesting that it's not. So what we want to look at is the meta-analysis. This is where we look at the overall picture. This is where people read every study on the subject, and they come to a conclusion based on weighing every single study and how valid all these studies are. So we can pop up the Johns Hopkins medical meta-analysis, and according to it, there's no evidence to suggest that lockdowns saved any significant amount of lives, and it's very likely they saved no lives. Okay, wow. So, that's one meta-analysis. Maybe you can find another one saying something else. But clearly, the lockdowns weren't as effective as people believed them to be, right? And Sweden is the best evidence of that, right? Sweden shows empirically that the lockdowns aren't that effective. Okay, so there's other economists who have figures on lockdowns, and I'm just going to pull you. I'm being a little biased here, okay? I'm only going to show you what Kaplan and a few of these guys say, because I respect these economists more. I consider them to be very intelligent and objective. But that's my opinion. But anyways, Douglas Allen said the cost-benefit ratio of lockdowns in Canada was 141 to 1, meaning for like every year of healthy life you save from these lockdowns, you cost 141 by impoverishing people, causing suicides, blah blah blah, right? All these other cons, right? So like people act like money doesn't matter when in reality money is a huge aspect of health. When people are poor, they eat nothing but Cheerios, and when they have money, they can eat better food, and they're not so overworked. Poor people are working like 2 full-time jobs just to pay the bills, and then when people are better off economically, they have time to manage their health, they have time to go to the doctor, they have time to exercise. So this is why lockdowns have a massive negative. Gigi Foster said lockdowns were a massive net negative, costing far more healthy years than they saved. Brian Kaplan, he's my favorite economist, he estimated that 1 year of lockdown was worth only 10 months of normal life, leading to a loss of 50 million plus life years in the US. Okay, David Miles said that UK lockdowns costs were clearly out of all proportion to the benefits after the first wave, right? So many prominent economists here telling you it's an extreme net loss, and when we look at the policy, they never actually factor this into their math. They only look at the lives saved, all right? All the Corvid data you're being sent only looks at the benefits of Corvid overreaction policy. It never looks at any of the cost, okay? That's not how you do a cost-benefit analysis. Okay, so next thing. This was a huge one in Australia, okay? This is errors in conditional probability. Now, check out my video on this one called 80% of Harvard doctors get this question wrong. It explains this conditional probability. So the idea is that, if you have 1 in 1,000 people in your area who have COVID-19, and you have a PCR test which is 95% accurate, and this is pretty close to the real numbers, okay? And now let's say you test positive for COVID-19, what is the actual probability that you have the virus? Most doctors would guess 95%, but the real answer is around 2%. Okay, and if you want to see the mathematics in that, it's in that Harvard video I have posted. So, did they make this mistake in reality? The answer is yes, absolutely. In Australia, they randomly swabbed people with this PCR test, and they put people into house arrest based on them testing positive. So it was like a court where you have a 95% innocence ratio, actually 98% innocence ratio. So that is obscene. Where's the justice about all these people who were innocently put into Corvid lockdown? Okay. Now, this was also noticed by The Lancet. The Lancet is the most prestigious medical journal in the world. And they actually posted this. They made this exact argument during COVID-19. So you can look that up. It's on The Lancet, right? How can you say, like people are like, follow the science. So what, is The Lancet not science now? So, it's like, it's more like follow the corrupt science, right? Okay, so what's next? Next is this data counting, okay? So, the right was saying that if you get into a car accident and you had Corvid, they would count you as like a Corvid death, right? Is that true? Partially true, okay? So it depends on which data sets we're looking at. Overall, it's more right than wrong. What they're saying is overall more correct, okay? So, for example, during Omicron virus, that is pretty much exactly how it worked. Anyone who tested positive for Corvid, they would count as a Corvid hospitalization, regardless of how they got there, okay? So that's true during Omicron. Now, according to Scientific American, the primary way they would evaluate your cause of death was by the main thing that started the cascade of death. Okay, so the primary cause, or rather the first chronological cause. That would be more accurate to say. So, for example, let's say you have really bad heart condition. You're 99% dead, and then you get a Corvid, and that causes you to die. That would count as a Corvid death. Now, that's clearly not accurate, all right? Because you're super old, you're super fragile, and the main reason you're dying is because your heart's super weak, right? But that would absolutely count as a Corvid death. Whereas if you got into like a car accident and you had a Corvid and died from it, according to Scientific American, they would count that as a car accident death, right? So the data certainly does favor extreme overestimation in that sense. And that's why we don't know anybody dying from Corvid, right? Just think about all your friend circle, They say 1 to 2% of people are dying in your country. Well, how many hundreds and hundreds of people do you know, and how many do you actually know who died from Corvid, right? I only know one person. They were a mathematician and they were in their 90s, right? So, it's not like, I mean, it does happen. Like, my friend's a paramedic. He says there's the occasional 14-year-old who he has to hospitalize from Corvid, right? But definitely extreme exaggeration going on here, right? Okay, and then there's the whole issue of the vaccines, okay? And I don't agree with the right here, where they just have a strict anti-vaccine policy. Yes, there absolutely was censorship about vaccine injury, okay? So Kyle Warner, I've been following him. I know a lot about mountain biking. It's has a lot to do with my profession. And Kyle Warner is a famous YouTube mountain biker, and he was not against the vaccines at all, but he had severe myocarditis, and he tried to just educate people on that. He's not anti-vax at all, and every time he tried to give a public speech, he was deplatformed. They would pull out the microphone and things like that. So clearly, they're not letting people just have a fair perception on this, because they're telling you the vaccines are totally safe and effective. Well, it's not true, and it doesn't have to be true for people to take the vaccine, okay? Because, like, for example, my doctor will show me this medication or that medication can cause a heart attack. But I say, well, what's the probability? If it's a 1 in a million chance, I mean, I'm more likely to get a heart attack from jogging. Okay, so the point is, we shouldn't be censoring these side effects. We should be looking at the probability and giving people, a fair cost benefit analysis. I think with old people, in many cases, like old and vulnerable people, the vaccine could be beneficial. And in a lot of young cases, the risks of myocarditis likely outweigh the actual benefits of the vaccine, right? So, it's all really crappy science, in my opinion. And my opinion is based on a lot of data. Okay, so we're looking at the actual scientific data. And I don't know how you can look at that data objectively and not come to that conclusion. Okay. And okay, in final thing I'd say is, I had Corvid-19. I took the PCR test to make sure, right? And if you have Corvid symptoms and you test positive on a PCR test, you're almost guaranteed to have the virus. And I remember I was betting people $1,000 I could run a half marathon during the peak of my Corvid infection, right? So nobody took me up on that bet, but I'm pretty sure I would have won. I felt a bit of a headache and a bit of coughing here and there, but by no means was it that bad. Okay, so I build a lot of drywall. I do a lot of home renovations and things, and when I was doing like drywall without a mask, the powder made me cough 100 times worse than my Corvid infection. I remember that I was really getting kind of worried. It was a painful cough, right? So like drywall dust is probably realistically worse, and there's a million guys who are professional drywallers and all this. So it's silly stuff, right? So the death count is extremely exaggerated. The vaccine efficacy is exaggerated. It's all lie through extreme exaggeration. And when we have this very consistent trend of extreme exaggeration, it's like climate change, okay? There's truth to it, but it's extremely exaggerated, right? So